I'd always been told that my ability with animals was uncommon. I see through their eyes. They see through mine. They know my thoughts, I know theirs.
The Beastmaster was released in cinemas in August 1982. Costing $8 million, it only managed a disappointing $14.1 million at the box office in America. It was panned by critics at the time, but it's loved by its fans. The screenplay was co-written by producer Paul Pepperman and director Don Coscarelli, very loosely based on the novel of the same name, written by the prolific sci-fi author Andre Alice Norton in 1959. Due to Coscarelli's love of the classic sword and sandal movies from his childhood, he changed the setting to a Bronze Age timeline. He worked with the production designer Conrad E. Anagon to realise this world. Norton was less than happy, however, with the changes to her story, that is actually set in a future world in her novel. She requested that her name be taken off the credits. Don is best associated with his cult horror low-budget classic Phantasm from 1979, which has spawned several sequels. The Beastmaster was Don's first and unfortunately last studio film due to the poor box office results. Don's filmmaking style has been compared to that of Sam Raimi, and he has worked with Raimi's favourite Bruce Campbell later on Bubba Ho-Tep in 2002. The movie sits within the sword and sorcery genre that was very popular in the early 80s, with the familiar stories of a muscle-bound hero, a scantily clad heroine, and usually a one-dimensional villain. Notable in movies like Conan the Barbarian, The Sword and the Sorcerer, and Deathstalker, which were all released the same year. It definitely became a saturated market and varied in quality as many low-budget movies tapped into this genre. The story follows Dar the Beastmaster. After a prophecy that King Zed's unborn son will kill the High Priest Mayax, he is removed from the Queen's womb by one of Mayax's witches and placed in an ox. When the witch removes the child to murder him, he is saved by a passing local and is adopted to his village. Many years later, the village is attacked and Dar's adopted father is killed by Mayax's followers, the Evil Jun, and Dar is saved by his loyal dog Kodo in the attack, who gives his life to save him. Dar is the sole survivor, and equipped with his father's weapons and discovered power to control animals, he goes on a quest to avenge his village and adopted father. In the title role is Mark Singer, best known for his portrayal as Mike Donovan in the hit miniseries V from 1983. Mark returned to the role of Dar nearly a decade later in the first sequel, but I'll return to that later. Along his journey, Dar meets slave girl Kiri, played by Tanya Roberts, who joined the cast of Charlie's Angels in the last season in 1980. Tanya wasn't Don Coscarelli's first choice for Kiri. He wanted a very young Demi Moore, but was overruled by executive producer Silvio Tibet, who was adamant Tanya play the role, as he didn't like Demi's voice. Tanya went on to star as the Beast Mistress herself in the huge flop Sheena in 1984, before starring with Roger Moore in his last outing as James Bond in A View to a Kill in 1985. Joining Dar on his quest is Seth, played by the great John Amos. John made a name in the miniseries Roots, and is known by many for his role in Die Hard 2, but for me he will always be Cleo McDowell in Eddie Murphy's Coming to America. He travels with Tal, played by Josh Milrad, who was nominated for a Young Artist Award in the Best Young Supporting Actor category, but since then John has focused on a career on the other side of the camera. The villain Mayax is played by Rip Torn. He starred in Robocop 3 and of course played Zed in Men in Black and Patches O'Houlihan in Dodgeball. Rip always plays over-the-top parts, and he requested that Mayax has a bird-like appearance, and wore a prosthetic nose for the role. He always reminded me of the villain from the Smurfs. Of course, the other stars of the movie are the animals that Dar picks up along the way. The eagle Shirok, the ferrets Kodo and Podo, and the black tiger Roo. As many fans will know, Roo was played by a tiger called Kipling that was dyed black using Clairol hair dye, as originally conceived as a Black Panther. The filmmakers were advised that tigers were easier to work with. You will notice in a few scenes his stripes can be seen showing through as the dye washes out. The movie score is provided by composer Lee Holdridge. It's a beautiful score that gives the right sense of adventure and scale to the movie. It always reminded me a little of the original Battlestar Galactica score. Lee provided other movie scores, but none as theatrical as this, mainly for comedies like Mr. Mom and Splash. Filmed on location in the Valley of Fire, Nevada, and parts of California, it's beautifully captured by the cinematography of John Alcott, who worked with Stanley Kubrick on 2001, A Space Odyssey, and of course The Shining. John provided shots utilising some of the natural lighting, from sunsets to action sequences set at night, only using the torchlight on set. This was a very clever way of saving money due to the tight budget, and works extremely well. Because the box office wasn't very strong, The Beastmaster made its way to cable TV in the States, being a constant listing on the fledgling HBO, which helped build a cult following for the film very quickly. The movie wasn't released here in the UK until April 1983, and was heavily cut to achieve the PG rating, removing all the nudity and the more gory aspects of the plot. This was the version most of us would have watched on home media until the full cut was released in 2013. This movie is one nostalgic trip for me. I went to see it countless times on its release in the UK as a kid, and more times than I can remember at home. I think it definitely benefited from being a more kid-friendly movie here in the UK, and became a fondly remembered classic. It's possible the mistake they made in the States was going for the PG-13/15 rating. This version was trying to appeal to young adults and the older audiences. I think the plot and Dar's relationship with the animals is definitely better for the younger audience. Sure, there's some things here that are a little close to the bone, with the child sacrifices and the death guards that definitely look like they're escaping from some S&M dungeon, and of course the half-man, half-bird-like creatures that dissolve their prey. I was always freaked out by the eye in the ring, and those weird old witches with the young bodies. Even now I still love this movie. It's still a fun and sweeping movie full of adventure, and never seems to drag in the very generous 2-hour running time. Sure, there are some bum bits of dialogue, and the plot's a little unoriginal and convoluted. There's moments you'll laugh out loud for the wrong reasons, and by modern standards the fight scenes are a little clunky. This movie has a lot of heart, and Singer plays the role well, and it looked like he worked hard to get in shape for the part. All the cast do a fine job. Because of the success on home media and the movie's cult following, the movie spawned 2 sequels and a TV series. Mark Singer reprised his role almost a decade later in 1991 for The Beastmaster 2 Through the Portal of Time sequel, which was directed by Silvio Tobet, the exec producer on the first movie, for around $6 million. Looking very similar to the plot of Masters of the Universe or The Neverending Story 3, which brings the characters into the present day. This is always a sure sign of money saving, and it looks bad, only being notable for starring Sarah Douglas, who starred with Singer in V, and she played Ursa in the first 2 Superman movies. The second sequel was a very low budget straight to video release in 1996, Beastmaster 3 The Eye of Braxus, which is better thought of and has a decent cast. Tony Todd taking the role of Seth, and Casper Van Dien playing the older Nal King Tal. The TV series was released in 1999 by the Canadian CTV, starring the home and away actor Daniel Goddard. This ran for 3 series. It's pretty awful, and from what I've watched, it's generic stuff. Very typical of the TV series produced at the time, when the genre made a revival on TV. I'm surprised it lasted 3 seasons. Mark Singer did make an appearance in the 3rd season. At the time of preparing for this review, I haven't watched any of the sequels, as I don't wish to spoil my childhood memories of the original, but I will attempt to watch them just for curiosity. I think it's a shame Don Coscarelli sold off his rights to the movie after its poor box office, as he may have had some more control here, like he does over the Phantasm franchise. The Beastmaster is a great movie of its time. It's simple, it doesn't utilise many special effects, just a few models and matte paintings. It's a shame it's so little remembered and talked about, like some of the less typical successful movies of the time, that definitely gets a lot more attention here on YouTube. So if you haven't watched this underrated 80s nonsense, and you're a fan of the genre, you need to give it a look, and only watch the sequels if you're feeling brave. Let me know in the comments below if you've watched the first movie, or any of the sequels, and let me know your thoughts.
To you, from your son.
Thanks for watching, and please consider subscribing to my channel. And you can follow me on all the usual social media platforms. And please take a look at my Patreon page, and please consider subscribing. Thanks a lot, and I'll speak to you next time. Take care.